She had stopped believing any man would ever choose her. Every time someone learned she had 4 children, they found a reason to walk away. So when she arrived at a lonely rancher's gate, she didn't ask for kindness, she gave him the reason to reject her first. But instead of counting her children, he counted the empty bedrooms in his house. What happened next changed not only their lives, but an entire valley forever. Before we begin, if stories of faith, love, second chances, and unforgettable frontier romances touch your heart, please subscribe and turn on notifications. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel around the world. Now, let's step back into the Old West. The wind came down off the ridge that autumn afternoon carrying the smell of dry grass and coming winter, and Clara Bennett stood at the gate of Hayes Ranch with her youngest daughter asleep against her shoulder and 3 more children lined up behind her like soldiers who had marched too far. She said the number before he could ask for it. "I have 4 children, Mr. Hayes. 4. No husband. No land of my own. If you mean to send us back down that road, I would rather you say so now, before they start hoping." Samuel Hayes stood on the other side of the gate with his hat pushed back and his eyes moving slowly over each of them, and he did not answer right away. 11-year-old Ethan stepped half in front of his mother, jaw tight, the way he had learned to stand in front of every man who ever looked at Clara Bennett with interest and then found a reason to leave. Clara had said the number so many times it no longer felt like her own children she was counting. It felt like debt. A rancher 2 counties back had smiled at her for a full week before he did the arithmetic. A shopkeeper's brother had called twice before he asked, gently, whether the children might be sent to live with kin. Clara had stopped waiting for men to finish that sum in their heads. She did it for them now, out loud, at the gate, so the refusal would come quick and clean. Samuel looked past her, toward the White House behind him with its dark windows, and he counted something Clara could not see. "Ma'am," he said finally, "I believe you've counted wrong." Clara's chin lifted. "I've done that sum 100 times, Mr. Hayes. Not this one." He nodded toward the house. "That place has 6 bedrooms in it. I've slept in one of them for 11 years. The other 5 have sat empty since before you and I ever met." He looked at her, then at the children, one by one, ending on the little girl asleep on her shoulder. "I wasn't counting your children, Mrs. Bennett. I was counting the empty rooms." For a moment nobody at that gate said anything at all. Clara's youngest, Ellie, only 3 and never once taught to be afraid of a stranger, lifted her head from her mother's shoulder and reached one small hand toward Samuel through the fence rail. Samuel let her fingers close around his own without flinching, and something in his face changed, quiet and unguarded, the look of a man remembering a sound his house used to make. Clara did not soften. She had heard kindness at a gate before. She had learned that kindness at a gate has a short memory once a man understands, fully, what 4 children actually cost a household in flour and firewood and sleep. Why would a rancher living alone, with a house that size, want a widow and 4 children he had never met? That was the question that followed Clara Bennett up the drive to Hayes Ranch that evening, and it was the same question the whole valley would be asking by spring. 3 years earlier, Jacob Bennett had been a blacksmith, strong enough to be trusted with the iron reinforcement on the new railroad bridge outside town, and gentle enough that his children ran to him instead of away from him at the end of every long day. A cable snapped on a Tuesday in October. Jacob did not come home that night, or any night after. Clara had been 26. She had 4 children under 10 and a house whose rent she could not make on her own. She sold what she could, kept what she had to, and went looking for work on ranches that needed a cook, a seamstress, a hand willing to do anything asked of her. The first rancher who hired her let her go after 3 weeks, apologizing, saying his own children complained there wasn't room enough at the table for 6 more mouths. The second let her stay through harvest and then, gently, suggested the county home might do better by children who needed more than one woman could give them. Walter Briggs, a prosperous rancher from the next valley, had courted her for 2 months before the arithmetic caught up with him too, and he stopped calling without a word of why, though everyone in town understood well enough. By the time Clara reached Hayes Ranch, she had learned to say the number first, so that no man's face would have to do the sum in front of her. Samuel Hayes had buried his own wife, Margaret, 7 years before, along with the newborn son she did not survive long enough to name in front of the church. He had built that house with 6 bedrooms because Margaret had wanted a large family, and he had gone on building it, room by room, even after the doctor told them there might not be another chance. When Margaret died, Samuel finished the house anyway. He told Martha Collins, his neighbor of 20 years, that a man ought to finish what he starts, even when there's no longer any reason to. For 7 years the house had stood mostly silent. Samuel worked, and slept, and closed doors on rooms he had no use for, and told himself that was simply what a rancher's life looked like. Then Clara Bennett stood at his gate and told him her children scared every man away, and Samuel Hayes, for the first time in 7 years, looked at a full house and saw exactly what he had been missing instead of what it would cost him. Learning to belong. Clara took the position Samuel offered, cooking, mending, keeping the house, and she moved her children into 2 of the empty bedrooms that first week, though she told herself, silently, not to grow used to any of it. She had grown used to kindness before. She knew how quickly a man's patience thinned once real life set in, torn clothes, broken dishes, for different appetites at one table, for different tempers under one roof. Samuel did not thin. He built a low fence around the well the second week, without being asked, once he noticed how close Ellie liked to wander. He brought home a saddle small enough for a 7-year-old's legs and said nothing about it except that Caleb had been eyeing the barn cat's kittens like he needed something else to look after. Lucy, 9 and quiet and always sketching, drew the ranch house from the hill behind it one afternoon, and when Samuel found the paper blown loose against the fence, he did not throw it away. He pinned it to the wall near the kitchen door, and left it there. Ethan watched all of it and trusted none of it. "He's kind now," Ethan told his mother one night, low enough that the younger ones wouldn't hear. "They're all kind at the start." "I know," Clara said, because she did know, better than her son did, how a man's kindness could run out exactly when you needed it most. Winter came on hard and early that year. Samuel taught Caleb how to read the sky for snow, taught Lucy how to bank a fire so it would hold till morning, and taught Ethan nothing at all, because Ethan would not stand close enough to be taught. Instead Samuel simply kept working beside him, in the cold, without complaint, until one evening in December, mending fence in the dark, Ethan finally spoke first. "Why'd you take us in?" "Truly." Samuel drove the last post in before he answered. "Man builds a house for a family he never got the chance to raise. Then one day a family walks up to his gate. Doesn't seem like much of a mystery to me. You could still send us off. Come spring, when the rent's due, when we've eaten a season's worth of your stores. I could." Samuel straightened, looked at the boy directly. "I won't. But I understand why you'd expect it. Somebody taught you to expect it, and I'm sorry for that." Ethan said nothing, but he did not walk away either, and for Samuel Hayes, that was enough of a beginning. The first real laughter in that house came from Caleb, 7 years old and entirely unafraid of anything on 4 legs. He had attached himself to Samuel within a week, trailing him to the barn each morning before the sun was fully up, asking questions about horses that Samuel answered as though they were the most important questions a man could be asked. When one of the barn cats had kittens in November, Caleb named every last one of them after tools he found hanging on the wall. Hammer, wrench, chisel, and a runt he insisted on calling nail because it was the smallest and, in his words, the one that holds everything together anyway. Samuel laughed so hard at that he had to sit down on a hay bale, and Clara, watching from the kitchen window with flour still on her hands, felt something in her chest loosen that she had thought was permanently drawn tight. Lucy kept her distance longer, though not out of distrust like her brother. She was a watcher by nature, 9 years old and full of a quiet that made people forget she was taking everything in. She sketched the barn, the horses, the long fence line, and one gray afternoon she sketched Samuel himself, bent over a wagon wheel with his sleeves rolled up, without asking his permission. When the wind carried the paper loose from her hands and pinned it against the porch rail, she was too embarrassed to go and claim it. Samuel found it there that evening. He looked at it a long moment, then walked it into the kitchen and pinned it to the wall by the door himself, next to the calendar, where it would stay for years. "You've got a good eye," was all he said to Lucy, and it was enough to make her come find him again the very next day, sketchbook in hand, no longer quite so shy about it. Ellie needed no convincing at all. She had decided, from the very first afternoon at the gate, that Samuel Hayes was a safe thing to love, and she loved him with the whole, uncomplicated certainty that only a 3-year-old can manage. She followed him from the porch to the fence and back most mornings, chattering about nothing in particular, and Samuel, who had once thought he would never again have a small hand tugging at his trouser leg, found he did not mind the interruption to his work in the slightest. It was Ethan alone who still measured every kindness for the moment it would stop. Martha Collins, 61 years old and married to no one in 30 years by her own choosing, rode over most Sundays with a pie and an opinion, and it was to Martha, one evening at the kitchen table long after the children were asleep, that Samuel finally said the thing he had never said aloud to anyone. "I built this house for 6, he said. Margaret wanted a full table. We lost the baby, and then we lost her, and I kept building rooms anyway because I didn't know how to stop. 7 years I've walked past 5 empty doors like it was nothing." He looked toward the hallway, where a strip of lamplight showed under Lucy's door. "It isn't nothing anymore." Martha studied him over her tea. "Does Clara know that?" "No. Might do her good to hear it. That woman's carrying a debt that isn't hers to carry, Samuel. She thinks she owes you for every meal those children eat. You'd best tell her plain that she's the one who's given you something back." Samuel turned his cup slowly on the table. "She won't believe it." "Not yet." "Then you'll have to keep proving it," Martha said, "same as you've been doing. Some people can't be told. They can only be shown, over and over, till the showing outweighs whatever they were told before." The town held its late winter social in the church hall the first week of March, and Samuel asked Clara to ride in with him and the children rather than have her walk in on her own the way she'd done every winter before. It was the first time the valley had seen them together in public as anything other than a rancher and the widow he'd hired, and Clara felt every eye in that room do the arithmetic Walter Briggs had once done at her own gate. She kept close to the wall, kept her children close to her, and told herself she had only come for Lucy's sake, who had been asking for weeks to see the fiddler everyone talked about. Samuel found her there within the hour, standing apart from the dancing. "You're allowed to enjoy yourself, Clara," he said. "Nobody's counting anything tonight but the beat of the music." "Some are counting," she said. "They always do." "Then let them count." He held out his hand, plain and unhurried, the same way he'd once held it out at the gate. "I'd rather dance with you than argue with a room full of people who've never once had to carry what you've carried." She took his hand before she had fully decided to, and for 3 minutes, turning slowly under the hall's low lamplight with a man who did not once look away from her to check who was watching, Clara Bennett forgot to be afraid of what anyone in that room might say. Caleb laughed himself breathless trying to copy the fiddle steps. Lucy sat sketching the whole room from a bench in the corner. Ellie fell asleep against Martha Collins's shoulder before the second song was through. It was, for one evening, exactly the kind of ordinary happiness Clara had stopped believing still belonged to her. Ethan watched his mother dance from the doorway, arms crossed, and said nothing about it on the ride home. But later that night, Clara heard him ask Lucy, quietly, whether she thought it was really true, what Samuel had said back in December about a house not being too small. Clara did not hear her daughter's answer. She did not need to. The question alone, asked without bitterness for the first time in 3 years, was answer enough for her. Spring brought Walter Briggs back into the valley, riding through on ranch business that did not, strictly, require him to stop at Hayes Ranch at all. He found Clara alone at the wash line, and he was, as always, polished and pleasant, and within 5 minutes he had said what he'd ridden over to say. "I only mean to look out for you, Clara. Samuel Hayes is a decent man, nobody doubts that. But decent men tire, same as the rest of us. 4 children is a great deal to ask of any household, and I'd hate to see you left standing at another gate come next winter, further from town than you were the last time." Clara kept pinning wet linen to the line, her hand steady though her chest was not. "You left because of the number, Walter. You never once pretended otherwise." "I left because I was honest with myself about what I could carry." "I'd only ask you to be honest too. A man builds a life expecting certain things. 4 children who share none of his blood is a heavy correction to that plan, however kind his intentions start out." He rode off without waiting for an answer, and Clara stood at the line a long while after he'd gone, and the doubt he had planted did not need much water to grow. She had believed Samuel's kindness might be different. Walter's visit reminded her how many times she had believed that before. That night she was short with the children, sharper than she meant to be, and Ethan noticed it before anyone. "He's been talking to Walter Briggs," Ethan said to Lucy later, in the dark of the hallway. "I heard the horse." "What do we do?" Lucy asked. "Nothing," Ethan said. "We wait. Same as always." Fear returns. Walter's words did not stay at the wash line. They moved through town the way such words always do, dressed up as concern, and by the following week half the valley had heard some version of it, that Samuel Hayes would tire of another man's children soon enough, that Clara Bennett ought to prepare herself and her 4 for the road again. Ethan heard it directly, standing outside the feed store while 2 men who did not know he was listening agreed that it was only a matter of time. He came home and said nothing to his mother. He said nothing to Samuel. He went instead to the loft above the barn, where he had, for 3 months now, been quietly saving half of every coin Samuel paid him for chores, and he counted it by lantern light and decided it was enough, or close enough, to get a boy of 11 to the railroad town 2 counties over, where a blacksmith's son might find work with his hands, the way his father had. He believed, entirely, that if he removed himself from the count, Samuel's arithmetic would finally work out easier for everyone left behind. He left before dawn on a morning when the sky had already gone the flat gray color that meant snow by noon. Clara found his bed empty an hour after sunrise, and the sound she made when she understood what he'd done brought Samuel out of the barn at a dead run. "He's taken nothing but the coat and what he's saved," Clara said, her voice not quite her own. "He's gone to prove he isn't a burden, Samuel. He's gone to make it easier on you." Samuel was already reaching for his saddle. "Then I'll go make sure he understands he never was one." "The snow." "I know the snow," Samuel said, and he was already moving. "I know this land better than any man in this valley, Clara. I am not leaving that boy out in it to prove a point to himself." He rode out within minutes, taking the fastest horse on the ranch and the trail toward the rail line, and Clara stood at the gate where she had first met him, for months of winter and spring behind her now, and did the only thing left to a mother who cannot follow. She waited, and she prayed, and she let herself, finally, be afraid of losing something rather than afraid of being given something she didn't deserve. Samuel found Ethan 4 hours later, off the main trail where the boy had tried to cut across country and lost the path in blowing snow, sitting with his back against a rock outcrop because his legs would no longer carry him, his coat rimed white, his lips gone the wrong color. Samuel got down off the horse before it had fully stopped moving. "Ethan." The boy's eyes opened, slow and unfocused, and something like shame crossed his face before the cold took even that from him. "Didn't want," Ethan managed, "to be the reason. You send them off." Samuel had his own coat off and around the boy before Ethan finished the sentence, and he pulled him up against his chest the way he had once imagined holding a son of his own, years ago, in a version of his life that had never arrived until now. "Listen to me," Samuel said, low and rough. "This ranch was never too small for you. It was too big and too empty before you ever came to it. You understand me?" You are not a debt I'm settling. You are the reason that house finally sounds like something. Ethan did not answer in words. He answered by finally, after 4 months of holding it in front of every one of them, letting himself cry, against the shoulder of the man standing in for a father Ethan had lost, a man who had never once asked to be repaid for it. Samuel got him back on the horse, wrapped against his own chest for the warmth of it, and rode for home through snow that had started falling in earnest, and did not once consider it a burden. They came through the gate at dusk, and Clara ran the last of the distance before the horse had even stopped, and for a long moment nobody said anything at all, because there was nothing that needed saying that the sight of them together did not already say. That night, with Ethan wrapped in blankets by the fire and finally warm, Samuel said, in front of the whole family and Martha Collins too, the thing he had been proving all winter without quite putting words to it. No child under this roof will ever have to earn their place here. Not by staying quiet, not by working twice as hard as anybody asks, and not by disappearing to make things easier on the rest of us. You're not tenants in this house. You're the reason it's a home. It was Martha, a week later, who told Walter Briggs, when he next rode through, that his services as a prophet of Samuel Hayes's supposed regret were no longer required, and that the whole valley had watched a man ride into a blizzard after another man's son, which was answer enough to any rumor he cared to spread from here on. Samuel asked Clara to marry him that spring, at the same gate where she had first told him her children scared every man away. He did not make a speech of it. He only said that a house built for 6 had finally been filled the way he'd always hoped it would be, and he would like, if she was willing, to make it official rather than accidental. Clara said yes before he had finished the sentence, and for the first time in 3 years, she believed the ground under her would hold. They married before the next harvest. Ethan stood beside Samuel that day, not behind his mother the way he once had, and Lucy sketched the whole thing to keep, and Caleb fell asleep on Martha's lap before the dancing was done, and Ellie, 3 going on 4 now, called Samuel Papa, without anyone having taught her to, simply because it was, by then, only the truth. Years later, the house that had stood silent for so long welcomed one more child, a small addition Samuel liked to say wasn't there to replace anything, only to keep growing the love the rest of them had already found. 6 bedrooms, and every one of them, at last, was lived in. Clara Bennett had spent 3 years believing her children were the reason no man would ever choose her. She had been wrong. They were the reason the right one finally did. The valley remembered that gate for years afterward, the way small towns remember the stories that teach them something true. That a woman is not the sum of her hardships. That children left behind by grief are not a debt to be settled but a family waiting to be claimed by the right kind of patience. And that a house, however large or however silent, only ever becomes a home when someone finally stops counting what it costs to fill it. If you've made it this far, subscribe to see how Clara and Samuel's story keeps unfolding, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'd love to say hello and see just how far this story has traveled with all of you.